heard the question because I'd never get there in a straight line. I always come around about. So I'm going to actually have you turn to John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31. Because everything about this message is going to be, why does John arrange his book around signs? What's the big deal about signs? He doesn't call them miracles, he calls them signs. And why should we get so impressed with the signs in John's gospel? And so that's what we're going to end up doing. So I've broken my rule. I've told you what this is all about before I introduce what we're going to do. So the purpose statement says, many other signs Jesus did which are not written in this book. But these 8 signs have been written, that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. John is here representing that he's giving sufficient proof for a message sufficient to give everlasting life. He's saying that a person can move from being dead, separated from God, and be persuaded by the evidence of this book, these signs, that it is sufficient to prove a message that will give a person everlasting life. So, why is he interested in signs? I think we need to talk about what is a sign. When you go to Las Vegas, or Lost Wages as a friend of mine likes to call it, you are overwhelmed with signs. What is the purpose of all of those signs? They're saying, this is a good place for you to lose your wages. This is a good place for you to give them some money. The signs are designed to pull a person in. They're designed to attract. They're designed to say, this is where you want to be. This is where you want to spend your money. You don't want to go to the place next door. You want to come here and spend your money here. That's what the signs are doing. In the Gospel of John, we have the word semeion, sign. It appears 17 times in John. And then we have the verb semeino. You can see how they're related, which means to signify. I bet you haven't thought of the word sign as being related to signify. Signs signify a truth greater than itself. I mean, in Lost Wages, when you see a neon sign, it's just some plastic with some electricity flowing through it. It in itself is not a particularly big deal, but it signifies something greater than the neon sign. Signs in the Gospel of John are meant to signify a greater truth. April 15th. Oh, yeah, you see what I mean about signifying a greater truth? You say, have I done my estimated tax? Did I get enough in, or am I going to have a penalty? It signifies a greater truth, and we all identify April 15th. There you have this thing that goes up and down and flashing red lights. It means you don't want to go through here when that is flashing. You might not come out the other side. You might get pushed down the tracks at a really fast speed, and you might not live through it. Lava in Hawaii, road closed. I think it's not a good idea to drive on that road. The sign is saying this would be a dangerous place for you to be. The sign itself probably costs a couple $100, but it could save you a lot of money. It's signifying a greater truth. You know what this sign means? One of those means biological men not allowed. Funny, there are a lot of people that don't understand it's a prohibition. My equipment's fine. I mean, if I'm safe to go down. Yeah, this is a big one. And it's one that much of our country doesn't seem to understand or appreciate. In April 2016, in Surrey, England, a big city, there were kids that were on an Easter egg hunt. And they saw a couple of robbers running off to hide from a police helicopter. And they could see that the helicopter had lost track of them and didn't know where these guys had gone. And they got down on the ground and formed an arrow. It's a sign signifying a greater truth. He went that-a-way. A big city. And kids who respect the police. That's significant. A sign signifies a greater truth than itself. So we have this word sign and signify that appear in John between the two words 20 times. And they're pointing in a direction. They are like arrows that are directing the reader to move from death as an unbeliever who is separated from God, does not possess life. Mere existence is not the life that God gives. Everlasting life is not just everlasting existence. You know, unbelievers are not going to live forever in the lake of fire. They're going to exist forever in the lake of fire. Eternal life is something special because it is something where we will be in the presence of the Lord. You might wonder if the Gospel of John says that point that I just made. Think about John 3:16. For God loved the world thus. For God loved the world in this way. You don't hear me saying so because except for the Spanish translation, most translations haven't picked up that meaning of so correctly. It doesn't mean so much. Although it would be true that God loved the world greatly. But that's not what it's saying. God loved the world in this manner. What was the manner in which God loved the world? That he gave his one and only Son. His love was expressed in that manner. The people who were hopeless and helpless, he gave the one who offers life. But notice what it says. The believers would not perish. Unbelievers are going to be in a state of constant perishing, conscious existence, but perishing. Unbelievers lack life. They just have existence. And that's what their status is going to be. So, the purpose statement once again. Thus, Jesus also did many other signs which have not been written in this book. But these, the 8 signs, have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Notice I've emphasized the word you. Why have I emphasized it? John in this tells us that his original readers had not yet believed, and that therefore they did not yet have life. The signs are designed to point a person to believing that message that will give them life. Signs signify a greater truth. They point to something even more important than the sign itself. So we have 7 plus 1 signs. You have 7 signs plus 1 in the chamber. And the one that's in the chamber is the cross and resurrection, the supreme sign of all the signs. You know, the first half of the book, John 1 through 12, is focused upon the first 7 signs, and they are balanced by the last half of the book that focuses on the supreme sign, that one that's in the chamber, the cross plus the resurrection. Let's look at these signs. Let's see what's going on. The first sign was turning water to wine. This is from an archaeological dig, and it's looking at some pottery. It's not looking at stone vessels, but what happens is Jesus comes into a little town called Cana of Galilee. And as he's there, his mother seems to have a very prominent role. I would suspect that the person that's getting married is probably a relative of Mary's, and therefore a relative of Jesus's. Why is that? Because she came up to Jesus and said, Houston, we've got a problem. She said, they have no wine. That's a scandal to happen at a ceremony like a wedding. That is a great breach of social etiquette for that to have been allowed to happen. Now, Jesus, as well as his disciples, have been invited. Jesus' family, I suspect, I won't digress into it, I suspect that some of his disciples also were relatives of the bride or the groom. So there they are with this issue, and Jesus says, good woman, what does this have to do with you and with me? Now people look at that and they say, oh, Jesus is rude to his mother and so forth. No, he's not. He treated her with great respect. And you know, it's very interesting. We can see that he didn't say, no, I will not do it. Why do you ask me this question? And the evidence for that is, what are her next words? She talks to the servants, and she says to them, whatever he says to do, do it. She knew that Jesus was working on his Father's timetable. He said, my time has not yet come. Now, we know from my time has not yet come that she was expecting for him to do something. She didn't expect him to just drive down to 7-Eleven. She was expecting something far more significant. That's why he said, my time has not yet come. He's working on his Father's table, not Mom's table, and not on the relative who is getting married. He's working on Dad's timetable. But lo and behold, when he produced the wine, can you imagine the value of at least 120 gallons of the finest wine ever? Can you imagine the value of the wedding gift that was given to this couple? Oh my, that's, they could go and buy a house. I mean, Jesus has truly blessed his couple. But then what happens is the master of ceremonies has been given the wine, he says, this is so much better than what you started out with. That's not the way people do things. Where did it come from? The bridegroom, I don't know. We just bought it from Fred or actually Nathan down the street. And then, the servants are asked. And they say, Jesus told us fill these jars with water again. People come to Jesus. And we're told as a response, his disciples were believers. They believed in him. But there's something that is very interesting about this passage. Who was there? Jesus, his mother, his disciples, and his brothers. 3 years later, we're going to find out that his brothers were still unbelievers. We're told the brothers were there. And they walked all the way from Cana to Capernaum. 1 day's walk. Now, if you're all walking together, what do you think they were talking about? Do you think they were talking about how the mariners were doing? I have a suspicion they were talking about, did you see the reaction of the master of ceremonies? And they're talking about this sign that Jesus has done. And his brothers are saying, can we change the topic? Can we talk about football? Signs signify a greater truth. This was an indication to the people who were there, anyone who was listening, and to any reader, Jesus was sent by God. He's the one that he claims to be. The second sign that we encounter in John's Gospel, among the many signs that Jesus did, John only selected 8. But we have Jesus in Cana of Galilee once again. And as he's there, this royal official, someone who worked in the Herodian government, a government official, a bureaucrat, has heard that Jesus has returned from Judah. Jesus was down for the feast of Jerusalem, and he's up in Galilee, and he's traveling around according to the Gospel of Mark. So he's gone to various places, and he hears that Jesus has arrived in Cana. And so he makes a trip out to see Jesus. And he begs Jesus, come before my son dies. Because his son was at the point of death. Jesus said, your son lives. That's the better translation. That's a literal translation of the text. Something very interesting. The operational word in that passage is live. We're going to have another passage that's going to come up momentarily, and that's Jesus healing the lame man. And there's going to be an operational word in that passage, and it's going to be rise up. That word is also used, egero, of the resurrection. Now, the man who was raised up was a man who was lame, had been lame for 38 years. But lo and behold, on these two signs that are put back to back, Jesus speaks about life and resurrection, or life and being raised up. And in his discussion, he ends up talking about resurrection and life. In other words, these signs are very clearly signifying a greater truth, giving this boy who's on his deathbed life from a distance a whole day's walk away, giving him life, combined with Jesus later on in Jerusalem, raising up a man who had been lame for 38 years, pointing to the concept of Jesus as the one who gives life and resurrection to believers. And lo and behold, the man goes. And we know that he believed what Jesus said, because the text tells us he believed what Jesus said. But besides that, there's something that is a subtle indication. He didn't object. He didn't say, Jesus, you have to come. You have to come. You have to be there in order to raise my son to life. He went. And we even have indication that the man checked into a motel that night. And you look in John 4, and some of you might be wondering, I talked a little bit about it in a previous session, but he actually checked into a motel. I don't know if it was Ramada. I don't know if it was Holiday Inn or if it was Motel 6. But the way that we know that is that the passage, he's going down the hill and his servants come up and meet him. And Jesus has done this healing at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon the one day. It's not enough time for him to get all the way unless he walks through the night, but he didn't walk through the night. He got a motel because his slaves, his servants, told him when they met him, your son lives. So he said, I'm looking on my Rolex. Could you tell me when it was that he began to show improvement? I said, the fever broke at 1 o'clock yesterday. And the man says, that's exactly when Jesus told me your son lives. Now the man didn't understand fully what Jesus meant. He believed what he thought Jesus meant. Your son isn't going to die. He lives. But he was expecting a slow recovery. But now he found out when Jesus said, your son lives, it's not, I know that your son won't die. It is, wham. His son is instantly better and playing with his toy tractors. His son was better. Instant healing. Literal, of course. Now we have the lame man. Jesus asked him as he is there in Jerusalem. There are a lot of people that are waiting by this pool because periodically an angel would descend and he would heal the first one who would come into the pool. So this man is there right next to the edge, waiting for healing. Jesus asked him, do you want to be healed? And he'd say, isn't it obvious? Well, not everyone wants to be healed. Some people like the sympathy that they get. But the man gave a complaint. He said, well, every time the water starts stirring, someone else gets there first because they have enough money to have someone that can carry them in and drop them in the water. And I don't have anybody, and so I'm slow crawling over there, and I never make it first. I'm always the one that loses on the lottery. I don't even get pick 6. Jesus told him, rise up, pick up your mat, and walk. Now we're told that the man had been lame for 38 years. We're also told that Jesus knew that he had been in that condition for a long time. Now the question becomes, why did John tell us that this man has been lame for 38 years? Why is it important that it was 38 years and not 36? Well, I guess maybe we ought to think about the particulars of this passage. Maybe it turns out that it's important within the flow of the argument. What we're told in this passage is that Jesus had a conversation later on when the man went into the temple. This man is now able to walk, and he's gone to the temple, probably to give God thanks for his healing. He didn't just stay there by the pool. He went to the temple. Jesus has a conversation with him. He says, "See, you are now well. Go and sin no more, lest something worse come upon you." You know how most people treat that? The something worse than being lame for 38 years is you're going to end up in a hot place, a really, really, really hot place. Is that really what the passage is saying? Let me give you a couple of reasons not to think that that's what Jesus is saying. Is there anything that this man could do if he is an unbeliever? Is there anything he could do to get eternal life? I mean, would it really make sense to talk to an unbeliever and say, stop doing bad things, because if you stop doing bad things, you won't go to a hot place? Would we really expect for Jesus to say that to an unbeliever? I wouldn't expect him to say that. So now let's ask the question, why is it 38 years? John is giving us a hint. There was another event, an event that happened in the Old Testament that lasted 38 years. When Moses led the people out of Egypt, they had a test at a place called Kadesh Barnea. And at Kadesh Barnea, Moses was saying that it was that the Lord had directed that they should go into the land and that they should conquer it, and that God had guaranteed that they would get the land. He would take care of it. He would fulfill his promise to them. But what ended up happening? 12 spies were sent into the land, and the majority is always right, aren't they? There were 10 spies that said, we can't do it because we're like grasshoppers and they're huge, and we can't take the land. There were 2, Joshua and Caleb, that said, yes, we can, because the Lord has promised it. It's not because of our strength, it's because of the Lord. And what ended up happening is God didn't allow them to enter into the land. And for 38 years, they wasted in the wilderness, going around in circles. They could have been in the promised land, but they're going in circles. I think that he's saying, you've wasted 38 years of your life because of some sin that you did. Do you want to waste your time during the kingdom? Do you want to be someone with no reward? He's saying, it's time for you to live your life in a way that serves the Lord so that you are rewardable. I can't imagine Jesus telling an unbeliever, do something in order to get life. It's, believer, you need to live your life in a way that's pleasing to the Lord so that you don't have a wasted time in the kingdom. Well, then Jesus fed 5,000. You know, each of these signs, do you see how they're signifying a greater truth? They're pointing to something greater than themselves. What happens here is Jesus has found himself with a huge crowd, 5,000 men, plus women and children. And I know that women look at this passage and they say, don't we count? That's often been a reaction on this passage. Why is it that the men are counted and the women and the children are not counted? As we look at the four accounts of this passage, what happens is we're told by Mark that the orderly way that they were directed to sit down had them in groups of 50 or 100. They're sitting down on the green grass. It's Passover time. And Jesus is, after he has prayed, after he's given thanks, he's breaking the bread and he's distributing it. Now, would you imagine that with this huge a crowd that could be 10, 20,000 people, can you imagine 12 disciples saying to each individual person, here is this, take this, then go to the next person, go to the next person. How long is it going to take when they are serving each individual person? Then they're having to run back to Jesus to get another load of bread to bring it out. How long is it going to take for 11 guys to distribute, or 12 guys to distribute all this food? I think what ended up happening was food, they would ask the head of a household, how many loaves do you need? And so I think the disciples were counting, well, let's say I gave it to 1, 2, 3, you start adding up. It's giving to whole households, and then the head of the household would distribute. I think that's the reason that it's a counting of the number of men. But you look at this tremendous amount of food that has been generated. What is being pictured is that a contrast with Moses. Moses was able to tell the people as they got to the Red Sea and the Egyptian army was behind them, ready to push them into the sea, wait and see the deliverance of the Lord. All Moses could do is tell people to see God's deliverance. He could tell them how to collect the manna. He could tell them what to do with the quail. But what does Jesus do? He actually feeds the people. Out of just 5 pitas and 2 little fish. And what was the response? In verse 14 of John chapter 6, we are told that men were saying, surely this is the prophet who is to come. Deuteronomy 18 said that there would be a greater than Moses prophet like Moses who would come and who would speak the very words of God. Acts chapter 3 tells us that greater than Moses prophet like Moses is Jesus Christ himself. Right after that, Jesus dismissed the crowds. And they were going to be people who would probably camp out for the night in the next town, and then they would head off towards Jerusalem because it's near Passover time. But Jesus sent off his disciples. There were a group that wanted to forcibly make Jesus king. So Jesus, he was a mountain climber. And nobody else seemed to be in good enough shape to keep up with him as he went up. And as a result, Jesus was by himself, but there was a group called the Kingmakers, and they were down there, and they set out sentries waiting for Jesus to come back down, and then they'd nab him. But lo and behold, Jesus surprised them. The disciples have gone out, and while they were out there, despite the fact that we are looking at experienced fishermen, what ended up happening was there was a storm that caught them by absolute surprise, and it was a whale of a storm. No, Jonah, this isn't Jonah. There weren't any whales here. This was in the Sea of Galilee, and the Sea of Galilee is fresh water, but it's large enough that people would refer to it as a sea. They're out there. They get about halfway across, and this windstorm comes up, and they are petrified. They don't dare go to shore, or they're going to crash, and things aren't going to end up well. But we're told that they were rowing. Now, when you row, which direction are you looking? Back. And according to Mark's gospel, the time that Jesus was there walking on the water, and lo and behold, we've got the wind blowing like crazy, and it's, swells. I mean, it's just, the water's just jumping around, and they see someone walking there, and they say, people can't do that. You couldn't walk on that water if that water were flat, let alone here it is, it's turbulent. By the way, there are no clouds in the sky. You know that? The text tells us it was wind. The text doesn't say it was all cloudy. It doesn't say it was raining. It's very important. This is at Passover time. It's full moon. That's how they knew how far they went, we're told in John's Gospel, that they went 3 or 4 miles. They could see the towns along the shore, and they're experienced fishermen on this lake. They know how far they've gone. But they don't dare go into shore because the waves are crashing and they would all perish. But can you imagine how tired you'd be if at 3 a.m. you found yourself still out there rowing and trying to maintain control of this boat, and you've got all this wind going on and you're topsy-turvy and everything else, and they had gotten into the boat at sundown. These guys are beside themselves, and they're thinking that they're hallucinating because there's someone walking, and that's got to be a ghost. And they're thinking, ooh, we're goners. Hey, pinch myself. Am I really alive, or am I dead? I mean, here they are. They're just, and Jesus says, do not fear. I am. Picking up on the I am of the book of Exodus. And then they wanted him to come aboard. But guess what happened? They took him aboard, and John's Gospel tells us they were instantly at their destination. You didn't know that that was a flying boat. And they ended up exactly where they were headed, which was Capernaum. And Jesus was going to speak the next morning. All of these signs, these are signifying, these two right here, Jesus is greater than Moses. This is showing that he is the one that God has sent, the greater than Moses prophet like Moses. Everything in this book is designed to bring a person to believe that Jesus is exactly who he says he is. We have signs, and what do signs do? They point, they signify a truth greater than themselves. I love to talk to people about the Gospel of John. You put a quarter in, I could talk about John all day. But I find John so exciting. I love to talk to people. When you have someone you want to acquaint with Jesus, look at these wonderful passages that we have. If you really get into John, you can help pull a person into John. Help them see that it's really exciting. Before I went to kindergarten, my mother would start reading a book. And she'd get right to the point where it was getting really exciting. And then, oh, John, I've got to make dinner. And I would be complaining, when can we finish the story? And she'd say, John, you can read. If there are any words that are hard for you, I'll help you. But you go ahead and read. So she had me reading before I ever got to school. I love to read so much that I begged her to buy me World Book Encyclopedia when I was a third grader, and she did. When I was in 7th grade, I spent my own money and I bought Britannica. But Mom gave me a love of reading and a love of languages, of foreign languages, and of English. But I also have a love of the Gospel of John. And I find it such an exciting book. And I find it that I can make an introduction to get people interested in a particular passage that signifies a greater truth that Jesus is who he says he is, does what he says he does. Since he is the Messiah, he's the one that can give everlasting life to those who believe him for it. Jesus healed a man who was born blind. That had never been done. The blind man himself reports that to the Pharisees. There's a big debate that's going on. Is this the same man who sat there begging, or is it just someone who looks like him? Did a miracle really happen? Did a sign actually occur? Or was it that there was just someone who happened to look like him, and was there anything really that went on? And we're told in the passage that the Pharisees, who were the second group to interrogate this man, did not believe that this man had been born blind. They thought that he was someone who might have just needed glasses. And so now he says, well, I see. So they decided that they would call in his parents. And they interrogated the parents. And the issue there was, if you ask the father certain questions, you ask the mother the same questions, and you compare the answers, pretty soon, if you're a skilled interrogator, you can figure out if it's a concocted story and if the pieces aren't adding up. But lo and behold, these Pharisees, who are pretty good, they are pretty good at ferreting out whether someone is lying, whether someone is fabricating. That's a big part of what they did. They say, what these parents have said is true. This is their son. Their son was born blind, and this same one now sees. Now, the parents were really courageous. We're told how courageous they were, because the passage tells us that they knew that the Pharisees had already concluded that anyone who confessed Jesus as the Christ would be kicked out of the synagogue. Now, if you were kicked out of the synagogue, that was like taking away your union card. You couldn't get work. You're kind of no man's land. So they didn't want that to happen. So we're told that they only told certain numbers of the details, and then they said, our boy is of legal age. Ask him. Aren't they nice parents? Say, throw son under bus. Son, if you want to get excommunicated, that's fine. We don't want to. And this boy is courageous. But I have to ask you a question. When we read this passage, what we see is this boy gives clearer and clearer answers. He's asked at one point, is Jesus a sinner? And he says, whether or not he is a sinner, I do not know. But what I do know is that I was born blind and now I see. And then they asked him, well, what do you think Jesus is? Well, I think he's a prophet. And most people, as they look at this passage, they operate under the assumption that the man is saying everything he knows. I don't think so. Remember, the parents were pretty astute. They knew that they had better not say too much or they'd get themselves into trouble. I believe that this man is gradually revealing what he knows. Let me give you the evidence of that. In the passage, we were told that the parents knew that the Pharisees had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus as the Christ would be excommunicated, so they kept quiet. That means they knew who Jesus claimed to be already. And this man, you think about it, someone comes up to you, you're blind, you're begging for money, and he says, pick up your cane and go navigate your way over to Pool of Siloam. Just go and do that. If you were a blind man and some perfect stranger who just seemed to be just like John Doe came up and told you, I want you to go to Lewiston. Just go there. Would you do it? I wouldn't. If I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't know if there was something good that was going to happen, why would I waste the gas? Why would I waste the time? But lo and behold, he gets up and he does that. Doesn't that suggest that he suspects that this is Jesus, and that Jesus could be the one who actually heals him, and that going to the pool was part of him getting healed? Why would he go? The parents knew who Jesus claimed to be. This son seems to be pretty sharp in this passage. He's able to hold his own against these professional interrogators. And he makes them look like absolute fools. People think that he's coming to the point of believing. I would say the text is giving evidence that he's gradually revealing the truth that he understands. And here as readers, what we can see is this validates Jesus' claim that he's the light for the world. And in this context, Jesus says that more than one time. And lo and behold, he says that he enlightens the eyes of people who are spiritually blind, who do not understand who he is and his promise, so that people can believe him for his promise as they see that what he says is true because of who he is. And his signs are his calling card. They're the proof that God has sent him. This is such an exciting book. We can introduce unbelievers to explore and to see that, yes, indeed, Jesus is the one who can give them life. Well, then we have Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. And as Jesus is across the Jordan River on the east side, word comes to him. Now, all the evidence within the book points that Jesus is way up north, contrary to how a lot of maps try to say that he was way down south. And they say that he only had a one-day walk to get to Jerusalem. But because of the particulars of the text, that he's actually in Bethania. As we look at John chapter 1, verse 28, it says, these things, where John the Baptist was ministering at the beginning of John's gospel, occurred in Bethania. Our text generally will read either Bethany or Bethabara. But Bethany is just one way of spelling Bethania. The location where he is east of the Jordan River, but it is far north, so that it ends up being a short distance for him to go in John chapter 2. The long distance that most people postulate doesn't work in the timetable that's given, because he had to be able to make the whole trip within 2 days, and they end up saying he did a 4-day trip. I know I'm talking here about things that I'm not going into detail on, but the chronology as we look at the text says this place that's John 1:28 is up north. And lo and behold, in John chapter 10, it says that Jesus is ministering when he receives word from Mary and Martha that the one whom he loved, that is their brother, was sick, that he was in the place where John was baptizing at the beginning. In other words, he is in Bethania. Now you say, where is Bethania? Well, Bethania is the place that in the Old Testament was called Bashan. And you say, Bashan and Bethania, well, it sounds a little different. Actually, Aramaic people did not like the letter SH. So a lot of times they changed the letter SH to T. So Bashan, Bethania. And when you look at a map, if you see Golan Heights, the Golan Heights are the area of Bethania. And so Jesus was way up north, and he gets word. And we're told that he loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus. But he got word that his good friend Lazarus is sick. And what does he do? He stays where he is for 2 days. And you know, most of the time when people preach this passage, they end up thinking that Martha, when she's talking to Jesus, is scolding him. She comes up to him. We're told that she went out to find Jesus. And so she talks to him. She says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Everybody thinks she is mad. She's scolding. Why did you take your sweet time? You could have gotten here sooner. You could have kept him from dying. But you didn't do it. That's how most people preach this. But he had a 4-day journey. Now, let's think about the timetable. A messenger comes. They didn't have cell phones. When he got a message, it meant someone came and said, Mary and Martha told me to tell you Lazarus is sick. He didn't have a Learjet to get up there. He walked. It's a 4-day walk. He gets up there and he says, Lazarus is sick. Jesus waits 2 days. That means the messenger is halfway back. I want you to look at John chapter 11, verse 4, and I want you to see what it is that Jesus told the messenger. Because the messenger is going to carry this message back. And I can imagine that this was a shocking message to Mary and Martha. John chapter 11, we'll start at verse 3. Therefore the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. When Jesus heard that, he said, This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. What do you think that messenger thought? Jesus is saying, Lazarus won't die. But picture this. Messenger gets the word. He travels down. It's going to be a 4-day trip. Jesus follows 2 days after. Jesus arrives 2 days after the messenger has given the message, this sickness will not end in death. That's what he would have understood Jesus to say. He's not going to die. But the sisters say, he's already been dead for 2 days. And there, wouldn't the natural reaction be, Jesus seems to be mistaken. But then they reflected on it. And I think that the text points us in a direction. And the direction that it points us in is that they figured out that Jesus was saying, God is going to be glorified, and God is not glorified by Lazarus dying. They're saying, its ultimate end is not Lazarus' death. Its ultimate end is that the Son of God be glorified through it. I think when Martha came up to Jesus, saying, Lord, you have the power over life and death. So if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. I want you to notice the verse that comes right after that. Verse 21 says, Now Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Verse 22. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. What do you think she is wanting Jesus to ask for? Could you raise Lazarus? Tone is very important. Look at what Jesus said. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. How many times have you heard people treat verse 24 as complaining? I know that he will rise again in the resurrection of the last day. How many times have you heard it treated like that? Yeah, I know. No. She's saying, yes, he will rise. Jesus, I think you were promising more than that. You were hinting at doing more than that. I kind of got the impression you were talking about maybe you might raise him now. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. And what he's going to do now is to explain what he means, I am the resurrection. That is, I am the resurrector. He who believes in me, though he may die, like Lazarus, he shall live. I think living here is talking about living physically. You might say, well, why would you think that? This first part is defining, I am the resurrection. What kind of death had he talked about? One who dies, who is a believer. Physical death, like Lazarus died. The one who dies physically will live again physically. I am the resurrection. And then the second part of what he says explains that I am the life. And he who lives and believes in me shall not die unto eternity, shall not have eternal death. The person who believes in me while he lives will never have eternal death. Why? Because he will have eternal life. I am the life. Jesus is the resurrector and the grantor of everlasting life. Now, in the course of things, they go to the tomb because Jesus is asked, where have you laid him? And as they arrive at the tomb, Jesus says something that Martha, who according to Luke chapter 10, is a very fastidious housekeeper. Jesus said in verse 39, take away the stone. And Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, Lord, by this time there is a stench, for he has been dead 4 days. To many eyes, that looks like she's saying, nothing good is going to happen here. We're just here to mourn. No. I think she's saying, Lord, why didn't you raise him without opening the door so we don't have smell? I mean, you can take him through the rock. You don't have to open the door. I mean, opening the door, there's nothing good about opening the door. Just raise him. But look at what Jesus says. I love it. Did I not say to you? Oh, that puzzled me. Oh, that puzzled me for years. When did he say this? When did he say this? If you look at the red letters in your Bible, you'll say, where did he say this? Where did he say this? Did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? Let's go back to verse 4. He sent a messenger back with a message. And the message that he sent the messenger back with, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God should be glorified in it. He's not telling her, if you would believe in me for everlasting life, then you'd see the glory. He's saying, if you believe what I have indicated, that I was going to raise Lazarus, then you'll get it. Now, I do want to go back here for a moment and look a little more closely at verses 25 through 27. It says that he's the resurrection and the life. He is the resurrector of believers. He will resurrect all believers. But he also gives everlasting life to believers at the very moment that a person believes. Now he asks Martha, do you believe this? Now, in the Greek, what we have is a neuter pronoun, neuter demonstrative pronoun. You say, that's nice. Well, what it's signifying is, do you believe all this? That is, do you believe that I am the resurrection and the life, and that the one who believes in me, even though he may die, shall live, and whoever lives and believes in me will not die unto eternity? And her answer is absolutely sufficient. Yes, Lord. Now, having been married for 47 years, I know that my wife will want to clarify a yes answer. And so she will explain it further, and that's exactly what Martha does. She's explaining why she believes that he is the resurrector and the grantor of everlasting life. And what she says is, in verse 27, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. Notice how similar that is to the purpose statement of John. These signs are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and by believing this, have life in his name. But I want you to think through what her meaning is. How is it that Jesus, being the Christ, the Son of God, explains why she believes that he is the resurrector and the grantor of everlasting life? Oh, and by the way, I should add something else. In Greek, it's a perfect tense. I have already believed that you are the Christ, Son of God. This isn't she just came to believe. This is her settled conviction that she's already had. What's going on here is she's saying, your office as Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God, requires that you give everlasting life and resurrection to believers. It requires it. Think back. God made promises to Abraham, right? To you and to your seed, I give this land forever. How would Abraham be the owner of the land and live in it if he weren't resurrected, if he didn't have eternal life? How would any Old Testament saint get there? And let's say that someone got there how long will they be there? One needs resurrection and one needs eternal life in order to be in his kingdom. And if he didn't give everlasting life and resurrection, he'd be a king with no one in his kingdom. Wouldn't that be an ironic thing? In other words, it's very important for him to resurrect and give life, because that makes it so that he can be a king with subjects in his kingdom. Signs are signifying a greater truth. Okay, now let's look at the last sign. The last sign is the cross and resurrection. Now, how do we know that this is to be understood as a sign? Glad you asked. Let's go back to John chapter 2. In John 2, Jesus has cleansed the temple. And as he did so, he drove out all the animals that were not caged, and he told the ones who were selling doves to take the doves away. They were in cages, they had to be taken away, but he drove the animals out. Many people think he's driving the people out, but he still has people that he's talking to, so he hasn't driven the people out. He's driven the animals out. So what ends up happening in verse 18? So the Judeans answered and said to him, "What sign do you show us since you do these things?" In other words, okay, what gives you the right to take authority here in the temple? We thought we were in charge. Deuteronomy 18 says that God will validate anyone that he sends. They're saying, show us your credentials. Prove to us that you have the right to do this. And here's what he gives as his sign. Destroy this sanctuary, and in 3 days I will raise it. Notice that verse 21 says that he's speaking of the sanctuary of his body. Now, some of you might say, this kind of sounds like bait and switch. Wait 3 years and you'll see the sign that proves that I have the right to do this. But if you look at verse 23, it tells us that Jesus was doing many signs at that time. But he's saying the one that will really prove it is the cross and resurrection. Notice, Jesus treats the cross and resurrection as the ultimate proof that he is the Messiah, the Son of God. And remember, this book is designed to use the signs to point people to believing that Jesus is the life-giving Son of God. So now as we return here, it's fascinating. The cross and resurrection are such a huge sign that they need further validation. And what happens? Way back in chapter 2, Jesus predicted it, right here in the passage we just looked at. Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb, and she concludes, they've taken away my Lord. She runs off to talk to Peter and to John and says, someone came and stole the body. And they go running, and it turns out that John and Peter come to believe that yes, indeed, Jesus has been raised. They go home. Mary Magdalene is still there crying. They apparently don't talk to her and tell her what's happened. I guess they just assumed that she'd figure it out. But then she suddenly looks in, stoops over, and has a conversation with two angels. And they ask her, why are you weeping? They've taken away my Lord. And she turns around. She sees someone that she thinks is the gardener. And he asks, why are you weeping? They've taken away my Lord. And if you've done it, why don't you tell me where you put him? And if you did, I'll take him away. I don't think she was strong enough to do it, but I think she had some friends. But she could go and get some help in order to do that. Well, then Jesus said, Mary. Lights came on. Jesus is the light of the world. I mean, the lights came on. She got it. She knew he hadn't been taken away. He's risen. And he commissioned her to go and to make an announcement to the disciples. Isn't that interesting? People think that the Bible has a low value of women. But who was it that Jesus sent to tell his disciples that Jesus is risen? He sent Mary Magdalene. And she made that announcement. And it's a fascinating thing. At the beginning of the book, John the Baptist was sent to announce the coming Messiah. And in John chapter 1, as a result of John making that proclamation, there are 3 testimonies, each given by one of Jesus' new disciples about Jesus being the Christ. That's at the beginning of the book. John the Baptist makes an announcement, and as a result, 3 disciples announce Jesus, the Messiah. And here at the end of the book, Jesus sent Mary Magdalene, to do something analogous to what John the Baptist did at the beginning of the book. Make an announcement to the disciples. And that led to 3 attested appearances by Jesus to disciples. The culmination of the book was brought about through the obedience of a woman to Jesus' command to carry the message that was to be heard by his disciples, and that led to Jesus revealing himself to 10 disciples, then to 11, and then to 7 by the Sea of Galilee. This is an exciting book. Let's look at what's going on. The book tells us these signs are written so you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. Is the bottom line believing the cross? That's often the message that people give, where they say, what you need to do is to believe that Jesus died on the cross to pay for your sins. And they're saying, my goal is to get you to believe the cross. They're pointing to the cross. But where does John point? The signs, including the cross and resurrection, turning water to wine, healing the boy from a distance, all the signs that he includes are designed to point us to believing Jesus for his promise of everlasting life. It's very different than what the normal message is. Yes, the cross and the resurrection have great importance, but they signify an even greater truth. The greater truth that they signify is that Jesus is the life-giving, messianic Son of God who gives everlasting life to those who believe him for it. That's the message that we have for a lost and dying world. We want to point people to believing Jesus for his promise of everlasting life. That's what this book is all about. That's the nuts and the bolts of this. Remember, I said I was breaking my rule. I started out by saying this is going to be all about signs. And a sign signifies a greater truth. Those 8 signs signify, they indicate to us the greater truth that Jesus, because he is the Messiah, because he is the Son of God, he gives everlasting life and guarantees resurrection to anyone who believes him for it. We need to get excited about this book, to be able to get other people excited to read it. Because, as Isaiah tells us, God's word does not return to him void without accomplishing what he sent it to do. What did he send John's gospel to do? To confront unbelievers with the proof that Jesus is who he says he is and does what he says he does, so therefore one should believe him for everlasting life. That's our message for the world, and there's no better book to do that than John. And I was trying to illustrate, this is an exciting book. You can tell people about the excitement of this because this book comes alive. Shall we pray? Father, help us to see this book as more than printed words on a page. Help us to see it as your book that is designed for helping our friends, our neighbors, our co-workers, our family, and even strangers with the truth that if they believe in Jesus for everlasting life, he is capable of delivering that, and he will.